At dawn on October 8, 1942, near the dark fields outside the town of Anapa on the Black Sea coast, a group of German Luftwaffe officers stood near their aircraft and laughed. Intelligence reports had reached them the night before. The Soviet Union, running out of trained pilots, had sent women into combat. Not nurses, not radio operators, women pilots, flying outdated wooden planes. The officers joked openly. Some wrote it off as propaganda. Others called it desperation. No one believed these women would last a single night in real combat. Just hours later, that laughter would disappear. If you want more content like this, subscribe now and comment below. The unit the Germans mocked was officially called the 588th Night Bomber Aviation Regiment. It was formed in October 1941 after the German invasion of the Soviet Union, when the Red Army was losing men at a terrifying rate. The order came directly from Marina Raskova, a famous Soviet aviator who had the personal support of Joseph Stalin. She pushed for all-female combat units. Against resistance from senior officers, she succeeded. 3 women's aviation regiments were approved. One of them would soon become legendary. The women of the 508th were young. Most were between 17 and 25 years old. Many had barely finished school. Some had never left their hometowns before the war. They trained at Engels Military Aviation School near the Volga River, beginning in early 1942. Their training was rushed. What male pilots learned in years, they were expected to master in months. Navigation, night flying, bombing runs, aircraft repair and survival training were all compressed into brutal schedules. Sleep was rare. Mistakes were punished. Weakness was not tolerated. Their aircraft made the mockery worse. They flew the Polikarpov Po-2, a slow, open cockpit biplane made mostly of wood and fabric. It had been designed in the 1920s as a training plane and crop duster. It had no armour, no radio, no parachutes in the early months. It carried small bombs under the wings, usually 2 or 4 at a time. German pilots called it a sewing machine because of the weak engine sound. To them, it was not a threat. But the women of the 588th learned how to turn weakness into advantage. By the summer of 1942, the regiment was deployed to the southern front. The German Army Group South was pushing hard toward the Caucasus oil fields. The fighting around Krasnodar, Anapa, and Novorossiysk was intense. German supply lines stretched long and thin. This was where the women were sent. Night bombing missions, harassment attacks, constant pressure. Their tactic was simple and terrifying. They flew at night, usually between midnight and 4 a.m. Approaching the target, they cut their engines and glided silently toward German positions. No engine sound, no warning, just the whisper of wind through wires. Then the bombs fell. Seconds later, the engine restarted and the plane vanished into the darkness. The first major engagement that changed German attitudes happened on the night of October 8 and 9, 1942, near the Taman Peninsula. German anti-aircraft crews had been told to expect nuisance attacks. Nothing serious. When the first bombs hit a fuel depot near Anapa at approximately 1:15 a.m., officers assumed it was a mistake or a single aircraft. Then another attack followed, then another. The bombing continued in waves for hours. The Germans fired wildly into the sky. Searchlights swept back and forth, but the planes were slow and low. Too slow for fighters to easily intercept. Too low for radar to reliably detect. Anti-aircraft guns struggled to track them. Each time the engine cut out, the planes vanished from sound and sight. By morning, the damage was clear. Several fuel dumps burned through the night. Ammunition trucks were destroyed. Sleep-deprived German troops were shaken and angry. Reports began to circulate that the attackers were women. At first, this was dismissed, then confirmed. The nickname came soon after. Nachthexen, night witches. It was not meant as praise. It was born from frustration and fear. German soldiers said the women flew like witches on broomsticks, appearing out of nowhere, striking and disappearing before anyone could react. The sound of the gliding Po-2 became a warning that soldiers learned to dread. When they heard it, they knew bombs were coming. Inside the regiment, life was brutal. The women flew up to 8, sometimes 12 missions per night. The planes required constant repair. Mechanics worked in freezing conditions, often under fire. Uniforms were ill-fitting, made for men. Boots were too large, gloves were scarce. Frostbite was common. Yet discipline remained strict. Commanding the regiment was Major Yevdokia Bershanskaya, an experienced pilot and firm leader. She demanded precision and courage. There was no room for hesitation in night bombing. One mistake could mean death. Navigation was done by map, stopwatch and memory. Landmarks were memorized during daylight and recalled in darkness. Among the pilots was Lieutenant Nadezhda Popova. She flew more than 850 combat missions during the war. On one night in 1943, she flew 18 sorties without rest. Another pilot, Yevdokia Nosal, became the regiment's first hero of the Soviet Union after her death in April 1943. She was killed by anti-aircraft fire during a mission near Krimskaya. Her plane caught fire, but she stayed on course long enough to drop her bombs before crashing. German records from late 1942 and early 1943 began to reflect a change in tone. Luftwaffe pilots complained about exhaustion. Anti-aircraft units reported constant harassment. Supply officers noted increased losses at night. The psychological effect was significant. Even when bombs caused limited physical damage, the lack of sleep weakened morale. The women adapted as the Germans adapted. When flak increased, they changed approach angles. When searchlights improved, they flew lower. They learned to work in pairs. One plane would draw fire, while the second attacked the target. Trust between crew members was absolute. Pilot and navigator depended on each other completely. The first time German fighter pilots managed to shoot down a Po-2 at night, it required extreme effort. The slow speed of the biplane made it difficult for faster aircraft to stay behind it without stalling. Some German pilots overshot their targets repeatedly. Others collided with the ground while trying to match altitude. By mid-1943, the regiment was officially renamed the 46th Taman Guards Night Bomber Aviation Regiment in recognition of its performance during the Taman Peninsula Campaign. The Guards title was a high honour in the Red Army. It meant proven bravery under fire. It also meant the mockery was over. The women were no longer a joke. They were a problem. Their role expanded during the Battle of the Kuban and later during the advance into Crimea. They supported ground troops by hitting artillery positions, bridges and troop concentrations. They flew in fog, rain and snow. Losses continued, but replacements arrived. Training never truly stopped. New pilots learned in combat. One of the most dangerous periods came in 1944 during operations near Sevastopol. German defences were dense. Anti-aircraft fire was constant. On several nights, the regiment lost multiple aircraft. Yet missions continued. Orders were followed. Targets were hit. By the end of the war in May 1945, the regiment had flown over 23,000 combat missions and dropped more than 3,000 tons of bombs. 32 of its members were awarded the title Hero of the Soviet Union. Many more received orders and medals. Some did not survive to see victory. After the war, the story faded quietly. The women returned to civilian life. Some became teachers, some engineers, some never flew again. For years, their contribution was mentioned briefly, if at all. It was only decades later that their full story began to receive attention. But on those early nights in 1942, when German officers laughed at the idea of a women's battalion, none of that future recognition mattered. What mattered was survival. What mattered was doing the job. And when the first bombs fell and the laughter stopped, history quietly shifted. The Night Witches did not win the war alone. They were part of a massive, brutal conflict that consumed millions. But they proved something important in a moment when doubt was everywhere. Skill mattered more than stereotypes. Courage mattered more than expectation. And on the dark front lines of southern Russia, that lesson arrived on silent wings just after midnight. If you want more content like this, subscribe now and comment below.